Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome to the Elevate Your Soul podcast. Today, I'm interviewing Nicholas Spohn, a motivational speaker, hypnotist, coach, and a podcast host of his own podcast called #SpohnTrained Personal Development Podcast. Today, Nicholas and I are going to talk about the antenna theory of emotions, which Nicholas has made for people to get a better understanding of how their emotions affect their entire reality. The antenna theory teaches you to become aware of your emotions and take responsibility of the quality of your life by learning how to elevate your emotional state by using body posture, breath work, facial expressions, movements, and language. This episode is short and sweet, but there's a lot of information packed into this episode, so I know you guys are going to learn and gain a lot from it. If you want to find Nicholas on Instagram, you can find him at SpohnTrained, the same name as his podcast, which is spelt SPOHN, trained. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Hello, Nicholas. Welcome to the Elevate Your Soul podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. First question I have for you is, what elevates your soul?
I love growth. I'm really into learning and personal development. I think just experiencing the whole spectrum of human emotions and all the things that we're put on this earth to experience. So, whether that's the highs and the lows and learning why we experience the things we do and why we act the way that we do.
Yes, very important. How can we begin to have self-awareness around what emotional state that we're currently in?
So basically our feelings show what emotional state that we're in. And I have this theory that I'm sure we're going to get into in a little bit of detail. And it's my antenna theory of emotions. And just like if you know anything about how an antenna works, it only picks up the station that it resonates with. So if it's tuned into country and you change it, well, those country station, those sound waves don't go anywhere, but now you only hear classical. And so when we change our vibration, we tap into different stations. So we can experience fear and sadness and guilt and shame, or we can experience gratitude and passion and joy and excitement just by tweaking a few little variables.
Right, but we can't experience both at the same time?
Right. So it's a different vibration, because if you're in your car and you turn your radio on, you only hear one station at a time. Sometimes you're a little mixed between two, but you want that clear signal on one emotional set point.
So it's depending on your frequency and what frequency you're operating at.
That's exactly it. And the way it works is that our brain takes in all the stimulus around us and it runs through our neurology, through our files, and it says, this is how we need to respond. Yeah. And then that creates an emotion within us. And that emotion changes the vibration of our cells, just like an antenna vibrates and resonates. Right. And now we're resonating with different thought patterns.
Right. And then what we think is going to change how we feel, and then what we do, and so on, right?
Exactly. Yep.
How can we begin to elevate that emotional state that we're in and keep it there as long as we can as well, so we don't slip back into the negative emotions? Like, how do we keep our frequency elevated?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to do it. And sometimes we actually need to experience and process emotions that are trapped in us. Because emotional energy gets stuck in the system, and if it never gets processed out of us, it'll interfere with the signal.
Okay. And do you believe that people can go about their lives without having that initial feeling of just any negative emotion in the first place? Like, do you believe that we can stay on that frequency of happiness, joy, pleasure, desire, adventure all the time? Or do you believe that it's human nature to also have those negative emotions? And then obviously when you have them, you want to express them. But I'm wondering if the initial feeling of feeling negative emotions is that, what is your perspective on that?
Well, let me answer this with a question. What is the best type of movie? Is it the movie where like the hero has no setbacks, there's nothing for them to overcome, there's no problems, they just experience joy and happiness all the time? That sounds pretty boring, right? And so it's that it's that contrast, that growth, those problems, those ups and downs of life that create, the framework, the everything that life is, and gives us the joys and the highs. And so without that, I think life would be boring. That said,
For
I
sure.
think a lot of people spend too much time in negative emotion, right? And we don't need to live there. Like, we can be there for a moment and then shift out of it.
Totally. Yes, I agree with you 100%. That's the key, is not avoiding those feelings. It's when they come, processing them as quick as you can, and then letting them go, and then moving on back to a higher frequency, back to a better emotional state. And about the movie thing, I totally agree, but a movie is only an hour and a half and not an entire lifetime. So after this whole heroic, you know, whatever, all of these challenging events happen, and then you grow from that, for the rest of the movie is that superhero living in a happier state from what he was. And like, for me personally, I have had a really, well, we all, I guess, a lot of us have had really rough childhoods, and my early adult years were also really challenging. And I like to believe that I didn't learn everything that I can learn, but that I choose to stay in that high frequency as often as I can. And I do believe that at some point, I feel like it's a lot to do with perspective as well. At some point, you'll learn to change your perspective on the things that would usually make you feel negative. And
Yes.
it's almost next to possible to feel happy and great all the time, but it takes a certain someone and a certain mindset and a certain, and you need that growth, that challenging time though, at some point in your life. I don't believe that you need that negative feeling and events to happen all the time throughout your entire life in order for you to be grateful and happy. But you need something at some point in your life, whether that's in your adulthood or in your childhood, so that you have that awareness of the two sides.
Yeah, and these are my beliefs, and they're my beliefs right now. So that makes them true to me. It doesn't necessarily make them universally true. And so
Yeah.
whatever we believe is as how we perceive the world and what we create in the world.
Yeah.
So if your beliefs are that you have, I have friends that believe they have to suffer and go back through all this trauma in order to grow. And
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not my belief. Maybe it's true for them. It's not my belief though.
It will be
Right?
true for them if they believe that though, right?
Exactly. And so what we do is we just reframe the belief. And so even you said, you had a rough childhood or you had challenges.
Yeah.
If you just change those words to like, oh, I had growing opportunities, like just reframing the perspective
Totally.
and the language that we use, you change the way you experience it, the way you remember it. That changes how you experience it emotionally in your system. And then the vibration that you're at will change. So to say like, some of my clients will say, well, I have a wall or there's a barrier. They'll literally like, there's a barrier between me and the walls, and their nervous system shows me where the barrier is.
Right.
And we'll change the word and we'll say, well, maybe that's not a barrier. Like, show me where the barrier is. There's obviously no barrier. But because they speak that, their nervous system believes that there's a barrier. So we always want to be reframing those negative emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, yeah. And that's more crucial for the present and the future, more so than the past too.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So what kind of things, can we do with this antenna theory to keep us in that higher frequency? And then when we feel a negative emotion, or we're in this negative, how do you know that you're in a negative emotional state? Like when you feel, when you get trapped in your emotions and you're like, oh my God, life sucks right now. Like nothing's working out. And then you have all the list of things that aren't working out and that you're complaining about. How can we tell that that's actually just from the emotional state that we're operating at? And that's why our perspective is so, negative on everything else.
Yeah. So even using the word negative will create judgment and a little bit of resistance, right? So I don't think about them as negative states. I just think about them as temporary states, right? Like we all experience depression and sadness, but for me, it happens for a minute or two at a time and I shift out of it.
Right.
So it's like a radio station that most people don't know that they can tune the dial and turn to something else. Right. So one of the fastest ways to do that is body language. And this is why I started teaching body language first, because I teach that there's 4 factors. So our breath, our posture, our facial expressions, and the way that we move our body. All of these things will affect our emotions. So, we could get into an hour-long podcast about each of them, but if you breathe deeply and relax, your nervous system will let that stress and tension go. If you put a smile on your face, you'll trick your entire nervous system into being happy.
Yeah.
If you stand tall and take up space, you will almost knock my light over. You will feel confident. And if you move quickly and passionately, you will experience an inner state of passion and like excitement. So just those 4 factors, breath, face, posture, and movement, can begin to change that vibration.
Right. Amazing. That's also probably why I love, like, if I never watch movies or TV, but if I watch anything, I'm always like, put on something funny. I want to smile the whole time. I want to be laughing the whole time. I want to be in a good vibrational state. Yeah.
Yeah, so laughter is a great one. It changes our entire physiology, where it changes our breath, it changes our facial expressions, the way we move. And it's great for building rapport, because the way to get people to like you is to be in rapport with them, which means your antenna vibrates at the same level as them.
Right.
And so when 2 people are laughing,
Yeah.
instantly all of their physiology, their vibration gets into sync, gets into rapport. This is why telling jokes is such a good way to break the ice.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Wow. So, but if people like other people that are reflecting their emotions, if someone's really sad, would they like want to be around someone else who's really sad? Or
So here's what I do as a coach. People like themselves. So I'm generally like, I think I'm a pretty high vibe. I'm positive, and I'll go into a session with someone who's depressed or anxious, and I don't go in like, "Hey, I'm Nick. I'm excited to be here. How are you?" Because we won't connect. So
yeah.
I change my body language. I change my pace of speech, the words that I use, and I'll slow down and I'll meet them where they are. And then pretty soon we get into rapport, and I'll start to pick it up, and I'll speed up my pace of speech. I'll start to stand taller, talk a little faster, smile. And because I went down and met them where they were, I
Right.
tuned into their station, then I can pull them up to a higher station.
Wow, that's a really valuable piece of advice right there. That's so beautiful. I love that.
So any room that you're in, right? Like I gave a talk to, I'm a real estate investor. I gave a talk to a bunch of old landlords in town, and they were all like closed off. And I went in super high energy to this talk, and they were all like, "Who is this guy?" Like they all shut down. So I slowed my energy down, and I was like, "Okay," slowed my pace of speech down, met them where they were, and then eventually I started picking it up, and their arms came uncrossed, and they really connected with me because I met them where they were.
Wow, that's amazing. And how can you do that for someone who calls himself an empath or is really sensitive? How can you do that without letting yourself be like, almost like you feel like they're pulling you down in their emotional state,
Mhm.
and then you feel like it's hard for yourself to get back up? Like, what kind of things can you do to help out a scenario like that?
Yeah, so an empath is just someone who gets into rapport very easily with somebody, right? And
Okay.
so the people that you're around, you energetically will tie in, you will resonate, you will feel the same things that they feel. It's an amazing skill to have. Now, one thing to remember though, is that as we were evolved to follow the person with the most certainty. So
Right.
if 2 people are in rapport, whoever has the most certainty will be the influencer.
Right.
So if you want to control the frame, you just have to have more certainty. So you
Right.
have to set an intention like, okay, I'm going to go into this exchange. I know I'm an empath, but I'm going to be certain that I'm going to experience this emotion. I'm going to meet them where they are, and then I'm going to lead the experience. Otherwise, you're going to get trapped in their framework. Does that make sense? You're going to get trapped on their station.
So you're letting them be the leader in a sense.
Exactly. But if
Yeah.
you have more certainty instead, you're like, no, I'd rather experience this.
Yeah.
And they can come with me or they cannot. Sometimes if I don't want to be in rapport with someone who's in a low state, I will like mismatch them. I'll tune into a different frequency. I'll use different language patterns. I'll close my body off just so I don't experience their emotional state.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, and I feel like empaths, it's an unconscious thing. Like, you made it sound like you're consciously like trying to match someone at their frequency, at their level, so that they can relate, and then you can pick it up from there and change it. I feel like, yeah, empaths, they just do it without even realizing, and they're like, why do I feel this way when I'm around that person, or why
Right.
did I pick up that energy when I walked in that room? And sometimes they don't even know. They have to become aware first of why they're feeling that way.
Exactly. And one way to do that is just to ask yourself, like, what am I feeling? And do I want to feel this way? Like, is this my emotion? And then if it's not, you just set an intention, change your body, change your language, change the questions that you ask yourselves, and you'll begin to shift into a different vibration.
Right. So this is leading to something interesting for me now. I have a question for you. If you're in a relationship with someone, or if you're living with someone who's, the closest person to you in your life, and yeah, they're always there, you're living with them, you're sleeping with them, and their frequency is off or low and they're depressed. Like I've heard it before, like some partners are together and then one of them gets depressed, which thank God I've never had that before. If anything, I've been the one depressed. But how can the other person be there as a support without getting pulled down if you're constantly like in that person's energy field and in their energy space without letting it drag you down?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's different for everyone. There's so many variables in a
Yeah.
relationship, right?
Yeah.
I think the first thing to understand is that judgment is the killer of rapport. So anytime you're judging your partner or even judging yourself for not being in the state, right? Like this happens all the time. Like I judge myself because I'm not in a great state or because I eat something I shouldn't eat. You
Right.
you lose the ability to influence. And so if you want to influence your partner without judgment, you can meet them where they are and know, again, set that intention like I'm going to shift their state. I
Right.
know like I'm going to show them love, I'm going to show them unconditional love. I'm going to get into their vibration and I'm going to bring them out of it. And because I believe that I can do that, usually I find a way to do it.
Right.
That doesn't mean it always happens. And sometimes we grow apart in relationships and that's okay.
Yeah.
But the way is to go in with no judgment, get into rapport, and then lead them into a better state.
So no judgment, as in you're not even judging them as being in like a negative space in the first place?
Yeah, exactly.
Or no judgment. What do you mean by that?
So, I mean, what is negative anyway, right? Maybe that's exactly what they need to experience at that time. But
Right.
I think judgment and resistance and attachment kind of go hand in hand. So if you have this attachment that they have to be in a certain state,
Right. Okay.
like that attachment is going to prevent them from doing what they need to do. And they're going to feel that resistance from you.
Yeah. It's interesting as well because I totally judge certain things as like negative or shadow side and like light side and positive. But I do have this quote that I live by: everything happens for a reason. So like
Yes.
at certain points I'm like, oh, this is negative, I don't like this, how can I shift it into the light, how can I make it more positive? But then at the same time, like at the end of the day or the end of the week, then I reflect and I go, well, everything happens for a reason. So those that space that I was in that made me anxious or depressed, or my partner was, then there's a reason for that at the end of the day. But then there's that balance between like acceptance and then also like knowing when to make a change.
Yeah, it's a fine line, right? Because you hear so many, like, you have to control your state and be in a positive state, and other people are like, you have to go through the emotions. And really, it's like, it's whatever you believe it is. Like, you have to do what's right for you, listen to yourself,
Right.
and then you can know, like, do I need to sit with this? Do I need to step out of this into a different state? And at
Right.
the end of the day, like, it's balance. It's always about balance. So if you go so extreme into like, I have to live in this high vibe state, you're going to create resistance, you're going to create judgment, and that's going to slow you down. And if you're the opposite of just always feeling and like experiencing these negative emotions, you're not going to be able to experience the highs in life. So it's just creating balance and knowing, let yourself be the guide, your intuition, right?
100%, I agree with that. Yeah, there's so many extremes, like caveman diet and veganism. Like where are these things coming from? Just meet in the middle. But with anything, I agree with that. And I was gonna say something else and I just forgot it. But yeah.
Yeah, the diets are a great example, right? Like,
Yeah.
and here's the thing with NLP and with hypnosis, we're always confirming our bias, right? Like we put on these like rose-colored glasses that just change the world, and we just see it as we believe it to be. We're always just confirming what we already believe. Because remember, our antenna only hears what we resonate with. So if you believe that, in the United States, we have Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah.
And I was talking with a girl at the bar, and she totally looked at the data to support her candidate, right? Like no other data even mattered because she didn't resonate with it.
Right.
And so that's how we see the world, is like totally based on our perceptual filters.
Yes. And you do hypnosis work yourself?
I'm a hypnotist, yeah.
Hypnotist? Wow. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like, I don't know. I've never been hypnotized. I'm one of those people who believes that I can't be hypnotized.
Yeah, of course. Then your belief is going to show up in reality, right? Because your beliefs creates your reality. So hypnosis is just, well, here's the thing. Most experts don't agree what hypnosis is. If you've watched the news on television, you've been hypnotized. Like TV is one of the most hypnotic things there is. So I'll give you my model, and this is, no one else teaches this, but I believe that hypnosis has 3 steps. It's rapport. Without rapport, you don't have hypnosis. Remember, we talked about rapport is just energetic syncing.
Yep.
So if you got hypnotized before, maybe you didn't feel safe or you didn't have rapport with somebody. Second of all, we talked about this as well. Whoever has the most certainty in a rapport situation is the hypnotist.
Right.
So even if that's just conversationally, you and I are in rapport, I'm more certain about something, we're going to do what I want to do. If you've ever gone into somewhere you're not supposed to be and you were just super confident about it, everyone in the room just lets you go, right? Like they didn't say anything.
Yeah.
That's similar to hypnosis. And then the next thing is focus. So when you can guide somebody's focus, because remember, our focus creates our reality. So when you're in rapport, you have more certainty and you use language to shift somebody's focus in such a way that it becomes their reality.
Yes.
Then you have hypnosis.
Amazing. Amazing. And so for someone who has so much certainty that it's not going to work and that they won't be able to be hypnotized, would that person have more certainty than the hypnotist at that point?
So potentially, I would say though, that you've hypnotized yourself to not being able to be hypnotized.
Interesting.
Which makes you a very powerful hypnotist.
Yeah, interesting. And the analogy you used before with TV, like my brain automatically used the word brainwash. So it was like hypnotizing is almost like, yes, you put them in a hypnotic state, but it's almost like you brainwash them, but in a good way. Usually, obviously, it's for their greater good. If I'm putting a judgment on that.
So we hypnotize ourselves all day long, just with our language patterns, just saying something is negative, like that's hypnosis. And then we feel that negativity, changes our antenna, the way we see the world, the way we live our life is different because we hypnotize ourselves. And so it's being conscious of that, so here's the thing, we can hypnotize ourselves following the same 3 steps. So if we're in rapport with ourselves, if we don't judge ourselves, and then we have certainty about who we are, what we're going to do, and we shift our focus onto what we want instead of what we don't want, pretty soon, like you're going to streamline it to accomplish all of your goals and be the person you want to be because you're hypnotizing yourself all the time.
Right. And going back to keeping yourself in a high frequency and a high emotional state. I'm trying to say this without like labeling it. Self-awareness, it's like from what you're saying, self-awareness and consciousness, but self-awareness is like a huge first step in that.
So I believe that like meditation is just tuning into those thought patterns and just noticing, becoming the observer, right? And once you become the observer, then you can shift it. So Bandler and Grinner, the founders of NLP, said that they believed 99% of people with depression are talking to themselves in a way and creating pictures in a way and subconsciously that makes them feel depressed. So imagine if like an ex-boyfriend or your mom or whoever was used to talk down to you, if you heard their voice running in the background, and it would make you feel depressed, right? Well, some people have that voice in their head going on all the time and they have no idea of it. So it's becoming aware of what is that voice, what is my inner voice doing, and do I want to shift it? What pictures am I making, and how are they making me feel, and do I want to shift it?
Right. I have another question for you then, personal one. So I deal with anxiety, and it's gotten so much better than it ever was, and it hasn't been an issue for a couple years now, but I just had a phase in the last couple months, like November and December previously, that it came up a bit strong for the first time in a few years, and I was like, whoa, what is this? And I tried doing that, like thinking, what am I thinking, to make this random feeling of anxiety come up. And I don't know if you know the answer for this, but it would just come up so randomly where I'd be in the middle of laughing, having a great time, sunny day at the beach. And in the middle of the laughter, I would get this, like, my heart would just go boof, like, and my heart would just race. And then I'd be like, oh, why am I feeling this way? And then I would just get anxious, but there was like no thought. And I don't know if I just didn't have awareness, but it was more like a feeling, like an overwhelming feeling of anxiety that came over without my thought going anywhere, because it was like in the most pleasant times that it would just randomly hit me.
Yeah, so there's a number of things that cause anxiety, right? And anxiety can be a tool. If you're anxious about that speech you have to give, it will make you prepare for it, right?
Right.
So anxiety is not always negative, and sometimes you might have subconscious anchors or triggers, and you get into that situation where you're really happy, and you're like, well, last time I was really happy, something really bad happened. Like, be careful, right? So it's trying to protect you. So there may be something that's linked up in your brain that consciously you're not even aware of, but you might see it off in the background, or a movie might come on, or something that creates that feeling of anxiety in you, and you just don't know it. Another thing is open loops. So anything in your life that's unresolved creates anxiety. So if you have a huge to-do list and like you don't have it written down, and like, your mind has all these things going on, it will create anxiety.
Okay. Yeah. And it's our perception of what's unresolved, and the time pressures we put on ourselves too. Like, this should be done, and it's not. But so you're saying like there could be something going on in the background that is unresolved. Correct. And even though you're not thinking about that one thing, it's creating anxiety like throughout your day, every day.
And we talked about trapped emotions as well. You could have an anxiety emotion trapped within you. And then when it comes up, you're like, no, I got to be high vibe. And so you push it back down. Right. It never gets to run its course and get out of you because you keep suppressing it.
Right. Oh, yeah. I've definitely dived into that as well. Suppress it. Yeah. Interesting. Is there anything else on your antenna theory that I haven't asked you about that you want us to know about?
I think one of the keys that keeps coming up for me is when we're always worried about ourselves, we always tend to experience like some of those negative emotions, right? Because nothing's ever enough. We're never good enough. Right. When we shift our focus from ourselves onto others, to serving others, as a hypnotist, if I'm in my head thinking about how I look, I'm not going to be able to influence you. So noticing you, calibrating you, paying attention to you, like you're the most fascinating person. How can I help you? We naturally shift out of those negative emotions, and we open up our spiritual pipeline. So the more that we serve, the more our antenna will tune into that high frequency and that high vibration.
Beautiful. I love that. Yeah, we're all one and we're all connected. So if we're looking after other people, in a sense, we're looking after ourselves anyway.
Exactly. And so when we're worried about ourselves, we cut ourselves off from that oneness, and that's ego, right? Like ego is separation. And so anytime we dissolve that ego, treat someone just like we would want to be treated ourselves, and use that ego.
Yeah. Amazing. I love it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
If you like this episode and are enjoying the Elevate Your Soul podcast, please help support me by sharing it with someone you know who could benefit from this episode or from this podcast by copying and pasting the link or simply sending them a screenshot. I would also love for you to write me a review on whatever app you're listening to this on. It really helps get this information out there. And if you'd like to support the podcast even more by helping me help you to create more ad-free content with incredible guests for free that help inspire people and elevate souls all around the world, please support me through my Patreon site at patreon.com/elevateyoursoul. You can be a part of my support network by making a small monthly donation to help me get the resources I need and dedicate my time to research and video and audio content. Or contribute a little more to also help guide the direction of the podcast by requesting episode topics or guests to interview. And if you can contribute even more, you will have all of the above plus a monthly one-on-one life coaching call with me so that I can help you directly. That's patreon.com, patreon.com/elevateyoursoul. Any support goes from me back to all of you and is greatly appreciated.